What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another SK Wealth Academy podcast, number 121. Now, before I get started, if you would like to support my work, my news sites, and my podcasts, all of which take many hours a week to produce, and which I have produced for the entirety of this year with zero advertising revenue, please consider becoming a patron of mine at patreon.com/SKWealthAcademy. Just look at the link in the show notes below and you will be able to click on that link and see the benefits you can receive for the measly cost of a cup of coffee per week. And some of the benefits that I have provided exclusively for my SK Wealth Academy patrons only are investment tips over the past 12 months of two particular stocks that yielded 429% and 1,650% profits from my suggested purchase price in just a few months' time. In addition, I have provided in the past 12 months multiple option strategies and investment analysis on multiple gold and silver assets with suggested purchase prices that yielded high double-digit and high triple-digit gains. So not a bad return on investment for the price of a cup of coffee per week. And if you have zero interest in any type of financial analysis, investment tips, and news of that nature, but you have enjoyed the other news and podcasts I have produced about other topics, then also please consider supporting me for just the price of a cup of coffee. And some of you may say, hey, I've been following you since 2006. And yes, I've produced thousands and written thousands of articles on my news site for free. And they said for years, you never asked for any support. So why now? Well, as we all know, the parasitic ruling class has ramped up their censorship, and which also caused the collapse of my last company. So that's why I'm working on the launch of my new company, SK Wealth Academy, at this time. So because the reins are tightening around our necks from the parasitic ruling class as far as strangling our means to make an income, if you wish to still have access to news like this, then that is why I need your support. Okay, so let's get started. Throughout history, the ruling parasitic class has always sought to distract the mob when economic failure incites the mob to start to think about violently overthrowing them. For example, in ancient Rome, emperors gave the mob brutal gladiator games whenever their economies tanked to distract and take the mind of the mob off of the poor economy. In more recent times, parasitic rulers have always taken nations to war to distract the mob away from their failure in economic leadership in order to maintain their power. So even with the incursion into Iraq with Operation Desert Storm as a nonsensical response to the 9/11 attacks, which apparently and allegedly were committed by 19 hijackers of Saudi Arabian origin. So yes, that makes perfect sense. Go attack Iraq for something Saudi Arabia did, right? So that's why I say that it doesn't matter, because so many people forget back in 2001, the economy was tanking. The stock market was tanking. So what did war do? War, again, uplifted the stock market, uplifted the economy with needless spending to basically snuff out the life of 1.5 million Iraqis that so far, through either direct bombing or indirect radiation from depleted uranium munitions or from mines that were left over from bomblets that little Iraqi children picked up and exploded in their hands and they died. About 1.5 million Iraqis are estimated to have died from those wars. So these unnecessary wars, again, are always waged to distract us from terrible economies. So where is the war, you may ask, because this economy is terrible. Everyone is struggling. I've heard that from everyone I've spoken to, whether on the Asian continent, the American continent, the European continent, the African continent, will tell me, hey, so many of my friends have lost their jobs during this economic recession, which was ongoing before the COVID economic lockdowns. That was already ongoing and on the way to complete financial destruction. So where's this war? This war between the Western superpowers and China, Iran, Venezuela, or Russia. Isn't that what's going to happen? Well, my response is that not all wars have to be waged by the parasitic ruling class against foreign entities. So some people may say, what do you mean? What do you mean by that, John? Well, these wars can be waged internally with the citizens of nations inside domestic borders. Because remember, most constitutions of most nations around the world, they make their military pledge to protect their citizens against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So why would the original writers of constitutions write all enemies, foreign and domestic? Because they had seen domestic enemies rise up through the ranks to squash the humanity of their own citizens time and time and time again. So if we consider that this war being waged right now is against us, we would realize that's as far as the consequences for us, it's even worse than a war waged against a foreign entity, as there are negative consequences of this current war against domestic citizens being waged in dozens of nations by the parasitic ruling classes that has heightened the state of economic failure that existed and was ongoing pre-global lockdown measures. So don't wait for the external war to happen as the distraction from this economic misery. If you see economic misery around you, the war is ongoing right now, and it's being waged by the parasitic class against the 99% of us, or even in some cases, the parasitic class only represents 0.1% of the wealthiest people of that nation. So in many cases, it's being waged against the 99.9% of citizens in every nation. So the war's already begun. And furthermore, since the 2010 discovery of the CIA, Mossad, or NSA, Mossad created Stuxnet virus, if you don't know what that is, go watch this fantastic documentary by Alex Gibney called 0 Days. I believe it's called 0 Days, because that talks about the origins of the Stuxnet virus, what it was meant to do. A lot of people, we remember hearing about, oh, the Stuxnet virus has infected millions and millions of computers all around the world. But most of us don't realize what the purpose of that Stuxnet virus was for. And what it was the very first virus in the entire world that existed in cyberspace, but yet was able to affect real-time operations in the physical world. So it just didn't wreak havoc in cyberspace. It was specifically designed to wreak havoc in the physical world. So since the discovery of that virus, it's very unlikely that a new war waged between foreign powers will even take the shape of a conventional military war. Because why would you send tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of soldiers to die waging conventional military war when you can use zero-day exploits like Nitro Zeus that have already been developed, uploaded to the internal systems of nations across the world? And with the activation of Nitro Zeus and other zero-day exploits, and zero-day exploits, by the way, are exploits that cannot be discovered until they are actually operational. So there's no way to stop them. So what these zero-day exploits like Nitro Zeus, which is the next iteration, the next generation of the Stuxnet virus, they're basically designed to shut down electrical grids across entire regions or across entire nations. That could wreak havoc on stock markets, shut down stock markets. It could shut down your ATM machines. It could shut off all access to cash. It could turn off public utility companies. So you have no more clean water. You have no more running water. That would kill millions of people. So why would, and then not only that, sometimes it would be very hard to determine who activated these zero-day exploits. So this is a way a country can wage war against another country and not even have to take responsibility for waging war. So the next war will likely be waged through cyber attacks that immobilize and shut down regional power, water, and financial grids. Because as I said, that would be much more devastating than even dropping endless bombs upon cities. So I've maintained since April, when I researched the global banker politician-led response of enforcing a worldwide financially devastating economic and travel lockdown upon the entire global population, that this response was never about protecting the health of global citizens. The purpose, let me tell you what the purpose of this global economic lockdown has been since day one. Since day one, number one, it's been to cover up the further looting of what little wealth the 99% still possess by the 1%. So the 1% is still looting the wealth of the 99%. It's also to draw attention, number two, away from ongoing global economic crisis, as most people seem to have already forgotten about the crash of the US stock market that started this year. Number three, it's about the artificial manufacturing of a crisis to further the agenda of the parasitic ruling class, which includes starving people to death. The United Nations said 260 million people are likely to be on the verge of starvation by the end of this year, which would make these state leaders enforcing this unnecessary global economic lockdown worse genocidal maniacs than Hitler, Mussolini, and Mao combined. And their agenda also involves complete destruction of the US dollar and the expedited, I don't know if I would call it seamless, but it definitely expedited transition of the world's financial platform onto a 100% digital currency platform from, this is very important, from which there would be no escape from economic slavery. Number four, the widespread installation of fear and learned helplessness to ensure a 100% compliance rate from the population when the parasitic ruling class launches their second phase of the 2020 global financial implosion that will require even more draconian lockdown measures than the one we are being subjugated to right now. And number five, it's merely also just for the, as horrific as this sounds, and as immoral as it sounds, but if you don't understand the mentality of the 0.1%, they are people with zero morals who are misanthropes that hate humanity, that are so narcissistic. All they care about is themselves and their family. They don't care about their friends. They don't care about the citizens. They don't care about anybody else they interact with. So number five, this implosion that is a consequence of this lockdown is merely for their entertainment. It's for the entertainment of the parasitic ruling class. They want to be entertained by our misery and suffering. So they laugh at the stupidity of the hosts, being us, because we're the hosts, right? Because every parasite needs a host. And we don't understand as a host that if we acted immediately while we still had the strength, because I'm not even sure we're beyond that point of no return now. We might be beyond that point where it's even too late to fight back and actually affect lasting sustainable change. Because the parasites have been at work since the 2008 global financial crisis. That's 12 years. 12 years we had to respond, and society at large is too cowardly to respond to the parasites, the immorality, the grave immorality of the parasites. And they are laughing at us because as the host, while we had strength, we had the ability to cast them out of our systems and ostracize them. And what happens when parasites are cast out of the host? They shrivel up, wither up, and die. So, maybe we still have the power right now to expel the parasites from our systems and regain our freedom, but I'm telling you, it's no more than a few more months. So if we don't act now, And you have young kids right now. Your young kids, I'm sorry to say, are going to be slaves. They're going to be slaves to the parasitic ruling class with no hope and a very dark future. So if you are about being the light, be the light. Don't talk about it. What we need is action. Talking and saying, stay positive. Be positive, everyone. Wake up and get it done. That is not going to get done. What's going to get done is action. And I spoke about both of these topics in late April in two podcasts titled The Real Reasons Behind the Global Economic Lockdown. And I think they were podcasts 105, 106, but you can look for The Real Reasons Behind the Global Economic Lockdown on my YouTube channel, SK Wealth Academy Space Podcast, and find part 1 and part 2 and go listen to them if you haven't already. Back then, I was only 95% sure I was correct in my analysis of the economic lockdowns that were just in their incipient stage, right? And just starting to really take hold before they really put the vice and squeezed our heads in that vice as they're doing right now. So with the benefit of 3 more months to observe these lockdowns, I'm 99.9% sure of that analysis today. And again, the parasitic ruling class, guess what? They're laughing at us for our blind obedience to their dictates and their draconian mandates that have no basis in science. These lockdown measures have no basis in science. And also the willingness of the social media influencers and the most popular podcasters in the world to peddle to the nonsense spouted by the parasitic ruling class is what is also causing the decline of Western civilization today. And it's converting millions more. A lot of these podcasters are responsible with millions of followers for converting millions more to a deep belief in non-scientific and non-factual based conclusions about the virus-induced economic lockdown. So I'm quite certain if we had the benefit of hitting cameras, recording the conversations of the parasitic ruling class in response to our response to the economic failure that they are imposing upon us, we would receive the equivalent of how many of these people there are, the few hundreds, laughing and cackling like Hillary Clinton did in response to the news that Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi had been murdered by NATO forces. They would be exhibiting the exact same immoral behavior. So in the history of pandemics, if you want to talk about science, I'll be happy to. In the history of pandemics, this is the first time that completely healthy people that have zero systems or strong immune systems have been forced to involuntarily quarantine against their own will, forced to stay at home, not be able to work. And the parasitic ruling class is passing this behavior off as a duty of a good citizen, aka a good little obedient dog. Be a good obedient lapdog, Jane. Be a good obedient lapdog, Joe. So no other time in history of any other viral outbreak did any scientific medical-based response suggest quarantining completely healthy people with robust immune systems. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go look at the article I post on my news site, malamalama.com/WordPress, in which I spoke about the Western media narrative that the no lockdown response of Sweden in response to COVID-19 was a horrific failure, because I produced 2 charts, and this is how poor society's critical thinking skills are as a whole, because I posted it on Reddit and already someone replied, oh, why did you compare Sweden's COVID-19 mortality rate to the United States? Because the United States is so poor, anyone's going to look good against the United States. But the fact of the matter is, the reason I compared it, see, they didn't even go to the article that I referenced. That's how lazy and intellectually lazy these people are. And that was only one of 2 charts. Number 1, I posted because it's been primarily US media that's been excoriating the response in Sweden. So if the mortality rate of the under 40 age group in the United States is more than 1,230 times worse than Sweden, if you say Sweden's a massive failure, what is the US? You should kick every single leader, every single governor, mayor, every single not parliament, that's the UK term, every single congressman and President Trump out of office immediately. If you're gonna call the Swedish response an utter abject failure when the results from the U.S. were over 1,230 times worse, so that is why I posted that chart to point out the hypocrisy. Now, granted, I posted 2 charts, so as people conveniently with, I would say, an IQ no higher than an 8-year-old. Maybe they're like, that's the only way it's acceptable that some of these comments that were objecting to the graphs I posted already, that's the only way they would make sense, is if these posters were less than 8 years old. Because if they're 30 with the stupidity or with the mental development of like a 6-year-old, which is what they were displaying, then our world is in a hell of a lot of trouble. So they completely ignored the second the second graph I posted, because the graphs I posted showed that almost all of the deaths in Sweden were in the above 70, above 80, above 90-year-old category. So they're saying, oh, what are you saying? Are you saying that the lives of elderly are important? That Sweden didn't fail because that you're saying that the majority, almost like I think it was over 98.5% of deaths were over the age of 70? Or is that what you're saying? That they tried to turn this into a social justice warrior issue. Oh, look, John doesn't care about old people. He said, let them die. That's the point is, because in the second graph, I posted the mortality rate of all the age groups, including the over 70, 80, 90 age groups in Sweden. Guess what? They were still far less than the mortality rate of the common flu. And they just ignored that. So they're saying how terrible Sweden's response was, but yet even the worst mortality rates in the elderly demographics was still better than the mortality rates of the common flu. And every year the common flu happens in America. Do they lock down everyone? So if the worst mortality rates of Sweden were far less than the mortality rates of the common flu in America, what does that say? That's why I say, like, today it's astounding how stupid people are. People, like, I can't even talk to people because they can't think for themselves. All they're like blind little robots. Oh, I don't know what to think. Let the media tell me what to think. I need to have, where's CNN? Where's C-SPAN? Where's MSNBC? I can't think for myself. You tell me what to think, and I'll bow down like a obedient little lapdog. I would smack these little cowards in the face, because that's what they are. They're cowards. They don't want to think for themselves. So they need someone else to tell them what to think, So I've never used my martial arts skills like in a bad way, right? To like beat up someone that didn't deserve to beat up. But these people, they're so stupid, man. They push me to the point of almost wanting to just like torture them physically, So it's just, of course I'm just like going off emotions. All of you that follow me know that's not the case of how I really react, because you would literally need to threaten my life for me to do physical harm to you. So don't worry, that's not my true nature. But sometimes, as a human being, you observe these things and it's so frustrating. It's like living in the 1950s when the tobacco companies hired doctors to lie to the public, to tell. You can go back and even find this on the internet. You can find cigarette magazine ads from the 1950s in which they said, this doctor says that this cigarette is the best for pregnant women and it helps to reduce hypertension in pregnant women. So they were telling people, and I guarantee you back then, if you say the same things I'm saying about the virus today, because 99% of the population doesn't believe what I say because it goes against, they all believe the narrative of the parasitic ruling class. And 99% of the people they believed again what the doctors hired by the tobacco companies told them. If you said the same things, they would and said, what are you talking about? How can smoking cigarettes be healthy for a pregnant woman? They would laugh at you and say, look, you're a fool. You're a fool. Oh, why are you not considering this? And why are you not considering that? Just like those people that came at me on Reddit that have the intellect of like a 3-year-old. It keeps going down. I know it used to be 8-year-old, 6-year-old, but they're just so dumb. Like I won't even engage them in conversation because it's a waste of my time. And probably they're just bots anyways. So I shouldn't, even emotionally react to them because a lot of times things are just bots because I can't imagine a human being actually being that stupid, so they have to be bots. And again, when we looked at these parasitic leaders, we have spineless cowards in the West and the East, leading nations, citizens into economic misery. And who pays, by the way, for all these people that say, I'm going to listen to the WHO because they're a World Health Organization, they must know what they're talking about. Why did they pay $135,000 to a PR, public relations firm? Same PR firm, Hill & Knowlton, by the way, that's coached a 15-year-old teenager to lie about observing Iraqi soldiers taking out Kuwaiti babies from incubators and throwing them on the ground like monsters to die, when it was later proven that that teenager was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States that was actually in Washington, D.C. on the day she said she observed Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait murdering babies. So the World Health Organization hired this same marketing firm to get people to believe their propaganda. I mean, it's just unbelievable how you can give people a mountain of evidence that what we're being told to justify the economic lockdowns about the virus is a complete sham, but yet people keep believing them instead of thinking independently for ourselves. So if you're an astrophysicist and discovered a primitive form of alien life on the moon of Neptune and released the scientific evidence and people refuse to believe it, what would your response be? Would you hire a marketing firm to design a campaign to utilize social media influencers and celebrities and podcasters to disseminate messages to convince the masses that your discovery was real? Or would you just use scientific facts and appeal to science to convince people that your discovery was real? Because guess what? Scientific evidence doesn't need to hire marketing firms or PR firms to convince people that can't be convinced of what you're trying to convince them of. So again, because there's no science to back a lot of the WHO's claims, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to spread their propaganda, to brainwash the most naive of naive people that understand nothing about science. And this is why the mass media, another arm of the ruling parasitic class, fears the success story of Sweden so much. Sweden responded to the virus with a science-based response, asking only the vulnerable to self-quarantine to stop the spread of the virus and to lower the mortality rate, as has been the case with every single other viral outbreak in world history. Sweden only did what every other nation has done in the history of viral outbreaks. And now everyone's acting like they went rogue by just doing what has been done, that has been endorsed by science to every single other viral outbreak in world history. And furthermore, the spike in viral related deaths, which was used by the mass media parasites to conjure up more fear around the world when fear was dying down to the virus, this was also a big propaganda lie, because a lot of the spike in viral related deaths that happened in Sweden happened at the start of the viral spread, and also happened because they're testing more people. So of course, if you test more people, you're going to get more positive tests. But what's really important is the spike of viral related infections, because what's really important in the end is deaths, not infections, because most people, as Sweden proved, under the age of 60 are asymptomatic, and almost no one dies under the age of 60. So in Sweden, so why would we be concerned about infections? We should be concerned about deaths. And 89%, I was wrong, I transposed that. Remember I said 98% earlier in this podcast? It was 89% of all deaths attributed to the virus in Sweden as of July 24th were in people 70 years of age or older. Okay, so only 11% were in 70, and actually a majority of that 11% were between 60 and 70. So they're almost like the percentage of their deaths in the 60 and under was almost negligent. And even of the 70 years in age older group, most of the deaths in that group were of 80 years of age and older. Okay, so in that age, normally, if you're 80 years of age or older, I think in the United States at 85, they say 30% of people that contract the flu die. The mortality rate is like 27.9% or something very, very close to that. I know it's like 27 point something percent that die just from the flu because your immune system's so weak at that age. So even in Sweden, as I said, the mortality rate is just natural because from contracting COVID, because as I said, it's even less than the mortality rate of the same age group, the same demographic age group that contracted the common flu in the United States. So the actual mortality rate of its under 60 years of age population was less than 3 in 1,000. Guess what the mortality rate from the common flu in America is in that same age group? It's 10 per 100,000. So it's more than 3 times as much. So how can Sweden be a failure? Everything says Sweden was a massive, massive success. And only 206 elderly too. I'm sorry, there are thousands of elderly that died in Sweden because, as I said, almost everyone that died was elderly. But if the mortality rate in Sweden was same as the common flu in the elderly, it would only have been a few hundred instead of thousands, given the 0.1% mortality rate, which was the 10 per 100,000, which I just gave you, of the common flu. So, I'm not disputing that this virus is more dangerous than the common flu to the elderly and to the very obese. So if you're extremely obese and your immune system sucks, maybe you should start exercising and start eating fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, whole grains, cooking at home, cutting out sugar from your diet, cutting out all processed foods, cutting off any food you can buy, purchase off the grocery shelf, because that is all garbage. It's not even real food. And that would do more to cutting the mortality rate from the virus than anything else. So in my podcast number 84C, I advocated this. I said this segmented strategy, which was basically Sweden's strategy, I said it's 1,000 times smarter than a blanket lockdown. And Sweden proved me right with the results as of the end of July that the Western media is hyping into mass hysteria as a complete failure. And that is a complete lie. So, is there anything else that I want to say? Sorry for this pause. I'm just looking at my skeletal outline of my notes for this. Well, there's one other model if you're American you can look at, and that's in South Dakota. Because South Dakota, they actually did not lock down their population. I'm not really sure how they got away with not doing that, since that narrative was spread almost all throughout every state in America. But you can look at their results. The results have been pretty good as well. And only 100 out of 100,000 tested positive for COVID, only 8% tested, or I'm sorry, only out of 100,000 of their population tested for the virus, only 8% tested positive. And only 119 in the entire state have died from the virus. And that's a mortality rate of 14.27 per 100,000 versus the mortality rate in New York of 100 that had extreme severe lockdowns, right? And their mortality rate was 168 per 100,000. South Dakota, 14. So whose strategy is working better? You don't even have to look at Sweden. Just look at South Dakota. South Dakota will tell you that these lockdown measures are complete bullshit. So, and even the latest round of tests in South Dakota, as of the recording of this podcast in early August, showed the infection rate even dropped. So it dropped from overall 8% rate of all those tested and with many more people tested than earlier, it's dropped to 6.1%. So finally, before I conclude this podcast, I just want to point out one other thing. Let me point out some scientific facts for those of you that remember the H1N1 avian flu, because that was like the last serious pandemic that spread, and that was about a decade ago. And so get this, okay, because now the Western media, all they're concentrating on are the spiking of infections to really trump up fear all around the world. Oh, look at all these people infected. Infection is like going like a hockey stick. It's going through the roof. And I told you there's all these reasons that conclusion is disingenuous. But the US CDC, the US Centers for Disease Control, estimated that there were 89.3 million people in America infected with H1N1 back then, and over 402,719 people hospitalized with 18,300 deaths. Now I'm taking they had a range of estimates, so I'm taking the top range for their estimates about the avian flu H1N1, but they're using the top range of all the estimates for the COVID virus. So to compare apples to apples, let's take the top ranges. So if we look at it now, if you use upper end estimates, CDC estimated that 575,400 people, so more than 500,000 people worldwide, died from the first year H1N1 circulated around the world, okay, with 18,300 of those deaths being in America. And in some aspects, the H1N1 virus was much worse than the coronavirus, because they said the people affected were working age people. This one, the COVID virus is just affecting mostly the elderly. So this one was affecting younger people. And globally, 80% of H1N1 virus related deaths, according to the CDC, occurred in people younger than 65, almost the exact opposite pattern, like I said, of COVID-19. So that's far in 7 months. We're 7 months into this as far as COVID-19, really probably 9 months, right? Because people say the first case in China happened in November of last year. So let's say 9 months in, there's estimated 4.3 million infections and 148,000 deaths in the United States, with 16 million infected worldwide, 650,000 deaths reported worldwide. But remember, okay, so the mortality rate is greater with this virus than H1N1, but we're just talking about infections. Remember, there are more than, in the United States alone, there are more than 60.8 million infections from H1N1. Thus far, there's only been 16 million. So almost what? 1/5 the amount, right? Because 1/5 is 80. Would be 5 times as much, it would be 80 million. And they had 89.3 million. So just 1/5 the infection rate. How come everything wasn't locked down back then? People don't ask these questions. People just don't ask questions. Because I guarantee you, if H1N1 was the virus going around now instead of COVID, the parasite ruling class would be rolling out the same bullshit they're rolling out about COVID to escalate maximum fear, and they would be implementing the same economic lockdowns with the exact same properties of H1N1 if they didn't have their COVID-19, if all they had was H1N1. And they did nothing to lock down the world 10 years ago when H1N1 hit, even though infection rate was 5 times higher in America. So the major difference between these two scenarios, people say, well, why would they do that now if they didn't do it with H1N1? You're saying that this is really no worse than H1N1. And H1N1 was a lot worse in many ways because it infected the working age population, the younger population, and the rate of infection was much, much higher. So why would they do that? Well, because the global economic conditions changed. Back then, remember I said it went from 2009, 2010, the central banks were pumping all the economies with trillions of yen, trillions of euros, trillions of dollars, and it worked. But you can't keep repeating the same solutions to the same problems and thinking they're going to work again and again, because there's a law of diminishing returns. It wasn't working because they were already pumping trillions of dollars at the end of 2019 through the overnight repo market to all the commercial banks in the United States. It was not working. So that was their response to cover up the ongoing economic collapse. It wasn't collapsing, it was recovering back in 2009. That is the difference. That's why the different response. So given the completely wrong commentary I'm hearing about why certain nations like Japan, Vietnam, South Korea have been so successful in combating it, well, look at the obesity rates in those countries. They're 2.1%, 4.3 and 4.7% of the population, whereas in America, it's been estimated anywhere to be 9 to 18 times higher in the United States. And I would gather that's probably closer to 18 times higher in the United States, meaning that almost half the adult population is considered obese in America. So that wraps up this podcast number 121. So I really hope that this made you really think, because we can't just keep blindly believing everything we're ordered to obey. This is not the way to change the dark, dark path we're going down right now. So please have these conversations with your family, your friends, your colleagues. If they don't understand the truth of what is going on, please try to talk some sense into them and get them to understand the truth. So thanks so much for watching. As always, remain intensely curious, and I send good vibes and many blessings to you. Take care.